I would like to open the Groveland Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, at 7:30 PM. Tonight, we have in the public hearing, application 2019-3 for Seawall Street for Groveland Realty Trust LLC, care of William Daly. Request a comprehensive permit pursuant to provision of the MGL 40B 20-23 and 760 CMR 56 to construct 192 apartment units in 4 residential buildings, a clubhouse with related amenities such as a pool, associated access ways, sidewalks, parking, utilities, and stormwater and infrastructure, located in the Industrial Zone District. Tonight's presiding the board, we have Kathleen Franson, myself, Jason Normand, Chris Goodwin, and John Stokes. We also have our administrator, Rebecca Olm, and Paul Harvey, our consultant from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. Yes.
Paul Haverty, I'm not the radio guy.
Yes. My God.
Well, you could be.
Because of the scope and complexity of the 40B meetings, this will be a multi-meeting project. And in order to facilitate that, we're going to set some additional ground rules and kind of plan our meetings a little better than the typical. First, I'd like to read in some of our procedures and rules, and just to review them and make them available to all. In our rules and regulations, which are presented on the website and adopted in October 4th, 2017, rules are pursuant that no person shall address the hearing of the board without the leave of the chairperson, and all persons shall, at the request of the chairperson, be silent. If a person, after warning from the chairperson, persistent in disorderly behavior, the chairperson may order him or her to withdraw from the hearing, and if he or she does not withdraw, may order the removal of the person. The chairperson may close the hearing if the hearing is becoming disorderly or disruptive. Rebuttals may be allowed at the discretion of the chairperson, and members of the board may address questions, but the general public should address all of their questions to the board, and then they will be addressed to the appropriate parties, not directly at additional. And the rules of conduct for the Town of Groveland Zoning Board: all attendees are required to conduct themselves in a courteous and respectful manner. The public is to refrain from private conversations which interrupt the proceedings of the board. Any individual may not address the board without permission of the chair. Each speaker will approach the podium and state their full name, address for the record, and will be limited to 5 minutes. All comments are directed at the board as a body and not at individual members and attendees. If there are any, we don't need that part.
We'll maybe have Paul go over a format.
Yeah, I think we want to go over the format, and we can
Turn it over to
save
Paul.
the schedule
Maybe
and
give us
all
a little
that.
introduction on how the whole process works and
Okay,
the
I can
procedure.
certainly do that. This is a comprehensive permit application pursuant to Chapter 40B, Sections 20 to 23. The way the process works is the board, from the night they open the hearing, has 180 days in which to conduct its public hearing. During that course of time, you need to get all the information necessary from the applicant so that you can actually make an informed decision. So it's going to be important for you to request information from the applicant as soon as possible, to the extent that you feel that additional information is necessary. It's important that the applicant respond quickly to requests for additional information. At the end of the 180-day period, it's not infrequent that the board is simply not ready to make a decision because it doesn't have the information it needs. And it may request additional time from an applicant. And the applicant is generally going to be in a position where they're either going to say, we've given you all the information you need, therefore we don't need to give you an extension, or if they recognize that for whatever delays have occurred during the process, that they're still at a stage where additional information is necessary, then almost certainly they will grant you that extension. So you do want to make sure that you're organized and you're moving through this process as quickly as possible, because that 180-day period generally moves a lot faster than you think it will. Do you have any specific questions in terms of how you wanted to proceed? I mean, I did have a conversation with town council yesterday. She indicated that the board was intending to conduct a meeting where you would, after this initial hearing, further sessions would consist of specific topics on a specific night, and I think that is a good idea. It certainly helps inform the applicants as to what members of their team they need to bring with them on a particular night. It certainly lets anyone in the audience know if there will be issues of concern to them that'll be discussed on a particular night. I do suggest that you leave yourself the flexibility of having more than just those issues discussed on a particular night, because if you get to a situation where you have a hearing and you get through something a lot more quickly than you thought, you don't want to have to close your public hearing, without addressing other issues that night, therefore basically wasting a night of your hearing, because again, that 180 days moves quickly.
Yeah, and we can review what our tentative plans are for that. We've grouped basically 6 topics that are pertinent, and then additional topics will be fit in as they come up if time allows, or at the end of the session. But the 6 main topics are police and fire, traffic, civil, stormwater, and then wetlands and architectural considerations. Each of those topics the goal is to basically cover 2 of those topics a month in the way our meeting schedules are set up. We will always have a meeting, weather and, health and whatever allowing, on the first Wednesday of every month. If we do not cover enough within that meeting, we will add an additional meeting on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. And depending on how things proceed in general, we may just extend it to that 3rd Wednesday as a regular thing, depending on how quickly things are progressing and where we stand. For tonight's meeting, the intention at the moment is to open the discussion, get an overview from the applicants, review any questions of the boards, to open up and have them address any potential discussion with the applicants. We don't intend necessarily to open up public discussion tonight. It all depends on how, time progresses and, what we allow, but we want to give thorough time for the board to review with the applicants directly, and the applicants to present their information to the public. My recommendation overall for public comments is to submit them in writing. We will definitely be opening up the public hearing and discussing, but if you want to be sure you get your stuff in, you can submit it in writing and we'll actually read it out. You still have the option to come up and talk about it separately, but because of limitations on time, it's hard to predict at this point how the meetings will progress, so.
And, Mr. Chairman, one other thing that I think you'd be good to accomplish tonight is to get peer review set up and ready to move.
Yeah.
Because if that's not addressed tonight and you wait till the next hearing and then you don't have them in until the 3rd hearing, then now you're
Yes.
almost halfway done. So my understanding is that there have been some requests for proposals that have been sent out already. Is that correct?
The town planning department has gone out for an RFQ and has secured 3 on-call peer reviews for specifically the planning board and other matters that will arise.
Okay.
And we have reached out to those 3 firms and asked them if they would be able to participate and review. The only one firm had gotten back to us at this point in time and provided their qualifications, which I provided to the board. So it's up to the board whether I can continue to try and reach out to those other firms or whether or not they would like to proceed with that particular firm.
So there are 2 bases in which an applicant can object to the selection of a peer review consultant. And one of them is a lack of qualifications in the subject matter, and the second is if there's a conflict of interest. So it would be good to get those names to the applicant tonight so that we can get their feedback on that as well.
Right.
I agree, I had that on my list.
Yes. All right. So on that note, shall we introduce the project and get that rolling?
Absolutely. First, let me introduce myself since I'm the person you'll be talking to most about the project. My name is Joel Kahn. I'm with a company called Equity Alliance out of Bedford, New Hampshire. I'm a development consultant who over the years has done a number of 40B projects. I'm very much appreciative of Paul tonight because those are exactly some of the talking points that I was going to also suggest, having done this a number of times in other communities. So I do appreciate that. I'm here tonight with Bill Daly, who's from Groveland Realty Trust, LLC, the applicant. Other members of our team who are not here, specifically for the same reason that we weren't ready to necessarily bring them forth. We have Millennium Engineering, who represents us for all civil work. Gate 17 Architects out of New Jersey that provides our architectural. GPI that did our traffic study that we submitted. And we are using Mead, Tallerman, and Costa for legal counsel. Is Brian too, Oxbow? Yeah, and Oxbow Associates for all wetland and endangered species type questions. So that gives you a little bit of our team. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to present this package to you. I do realize the complexities to it and do appreciate the fact that while I'm going to provide a summary tonight, there's a lot of information to absorb. There's a lot of information in the applicant and the plans. And I know that, Groveland has not done, numerous 40Bs, so the process itself is I know is also new to you all as a board. I'm not here tonight to talk about the nuances of the waivers that we're seeking or anything else because the process often can involve dialogue back and forth between an applicant and a board and result in modifications to a plan that may or may not increase or decrease the amount of waivers. So while we've submitted those as part of the process of our application, I would like to suggest that again that they be held to the end of the process when we can look in, assuming that we're at all liking each other at that point, work through whatever the decision the board might be. So with that, I'd like to sort of give you first and sort of help you get a little bit of understanding of where the site is. You all know Bill probably a long time, and you're probably aware very much of the quarry. So the quarry was excavated at some period of time, and they took a huge cut out of a hill. And what's interesting about this, and I do a lot of development work for multifamily people as well as for hospitals, is that this to me is one of those kind of perfect things of where you're trying to take something that was used for one other purpose and then reintroduce it back into it for another purpose. And right now when you go into the quarry as it exists, you're going to find yourself in what I consider to be a dangerous cliff that was created. And as such, this has tremendous opportunity. The property is what you see here in green. I could list off the parcel numbers for you, and if you want for the record, but I think they were contained in the application. But the access that we're proposing off of Sewell Street, and then coming up into the site, and the site also has access into Nelson Street. I know during the application for 40B, one of the town's concerns at the time was whether we had actual site control. We did produce documents to ultimately Massachusetts Housing Authority that in fact reviewed it and were satisfied that in fact we did. This is an interesting site because it's been in front of a lot of the boards of this town really already, because when Bill and his partners acquired it, they acquired it with the intent of refilling the quarry back up again. And for that, there was an extensive process that we needed to go through that dealt with endangered species, it dealt with wetlands, it dealt with all the kinds of issues that I know are important to this board, and they were done as a result as part of that permitting process. So though a lot of those documents available, they were already even reviewed by conservation and other boards within the community. What you really see in here is, in green, is approximately 38 acres of land, of which really only 14 acres, which is the lighter green, is considered developable. The rest of it is either wetlands, protected habitat, kinds of lands that were already agreed to that would be protected going forward forever and a day. So there's really only 14 acres of land that we're talking about. This land is zoned currently industrial. As a matter of fact, I know this town in 2018 did a housing production plan, which often many communities do as part of their efforts to satisfy 40B regulations. And as you know, you need to acquire ultimately to gain safe harbor 10% of your housing stock to be deemed affordable. I think this town is currently around 3.3%. And in an affordable housing plan, there was actually very specific recommendations that were contained within the plan itself. And what is surprising in the plan is that it actually cites this property as an ideal suitable project for 40B. And it also talked about the fact that one of the ways, and there were many ways that the plan cited the ways in which it in fact could satisfy and gain more affordable units in its efforts to reach that 10% milestone. And it talked about one of them was the issue that they would look to the private sector as a way that they could bring the capital and the efforts to create, in fact, a 40B project. And you can find out if you ever look at it, it was considered Site 26 in the passage. And so it's interesting how the town at the time evaluated and cited that as being a very appropriate parcel. The site is currently serviced by, on Salem Street by natural gas, obviously electrical, and municipal water. We understand that there was some concerns about whatever we designed for water system to ensure that we in fact provide a loop back out to Nelson. I've been aware of that in other projects that it was very concerned. It's a non-issue as we've already agreed that that is an important aspect of properly designing a water system for the project. While currently we are proposing a wastewater treatment facility to provide the necessary fields for the project. I know also that there's been discussions about the idea of sewer extensions and whether sewer ultimately could be brought to the site and enhanced for this area. Because currently, the industrial zone that includes across the street for the current industrial user there is not on town sewer. So we are certainly open and have been discussing the possibility of just that. The project is to consist of 4 buildings that are all 4-story over structured parking. So what that does is that it provides, in essence, about 160 enclosed parking places, and in total, 391 total parking places. So a lot of times in multifamily development, the question comes is, well, how do you know how much parking should be developed as part of any project? There are actually a lot of national studies have been done. I deal with a lot of national companies in their ongoing management of apartments. And the magic number is 1.75 spaces is the minimum that's typically required. And in this particular case, we're achieving closer to 2 spaces per unit. The project is, again, 192 units. The buildings are currently configured to be identical. The project will generate a total of 48 affordable units. Affordable units being defined as those units that will lease to persons earning no more than 80% of the median household income. We have committed to do that. 25% of our units will be constructed that way. They would be evenly dispersed by both unit size and location. There's always a big thing about, the fact that you can't just put the affordable units in the wrong place. That always has people looking at dumpsters or what have you. That's anything to the contrary. So these units will be dispersed. 10% of them are 3-bedroom units. There's a requirement in 40B that 10% of units are done for families, and so we are also satisfying that requirement. of which 5 of those would be affordable and 14 would be market rate. The rest of them are generally equally dispersed between the 1s and the 2s, which is really what current market indicates is the proper proportions for that. And again, affordability would be similar throughout. 1 bedrooms are roughly 860 square feet, 2 bedrooms roughly 1,160, and the 3s get up to almost 1,550 plus square feet of space. Design here is to make these modern apartments. You know, one of the things about apartments, often communities like to say, well, we have apartments. Well, today's apartments are 9-foot ceilings. You know, they have big walk-in closets. They have granite. They have all the amenities that make the shelf life of the product much longer lasting. I often do market studies and can drive on a project, and you could drive right up before you even get out of your car, and you can sit there and say, that was built in the 70s, or that was built in the 80s. And you can see the evolution of the apartment business and how it has evolved over the years. But these are really trying to touch upon, you know, renters by choice, not necessarily renters by necessity. And what I mean by that is that all these buildings will have an elevator. They will have underground parking. Sure, not everybody can necessarily have one, but what that does is opens up very interesting opportunities for the kind of people who really find themselves in this type of project. One of them is the over 55 sec, the downsizing group that sits there and says, you know, I've owned a home in Groveland all my life, and, you know, I want to stay rooted, or I want to spend my summers up here and go to Florida. And they often become a very important part of what these communities create. There's a couple of large projects in Salisbury and Tewksbury. I was involved in the one out there, the old mini golf place on the way. And we track actually the demographics of the average age. And it always astonishes me of what you find about that the age is really on average more like 48. And many people think that, oh, it's always just young people and it's always just single people. And that's not necessarily true. The other side are, yes, young couples. There's no question about it that, you know, the young family starting often comes to a project. But one of the things we track in these other projects is the number of kids. And, you know, there's lots of studies that go to a formula of a bedroom will generate X amount on average, and a 2-bedroom, you know, a fraction of that. But reality, what we find is, while yes, there are children that end up on the property, most of them are really not necessarily always school-age children, because by the time a couple has a child and it starts to get up to school age, they're often going to the single-family home, and they're also evolving. I'm not telling you that it's with an absolute, but often that is particularly the case. So it's got a really interesting aspect to how it appeals to the market. And what we're finding today is that this renter-by-choice market, in other words, the consciousness not everybody wants to own a home, you know, through their entire life cycle, it's become an important aspect. The young people today often sit there and say, I don't want to be burdened with all that, and I want to live in a really good place, and I want to, you know, get rooted in the community, but I'm not interested in that. I'd rather take that money and go travel or do whatever they want to do. And so it's very different kinds of ways in which we see these projects being populated today. When Bill came to me and started this whole project, of course, one of the first things is, you know, will the market bear it? I mean, you know, is there a demand for it? And you know, when we start talking about spending $40+ million of money, of which, by the way, that requires him to spend a lot of his money, because you can't borrow all that. The answer is we constantly look at the market in the work in the markets that I play in, to sort of gauge whether or not the supply-demand has reached a point where it's no longer balanced correctly. And what we continually find in this particular market, and really a lot on the 495 belt, is that markets are generally at 95, 97% occupancy, and that you still see rents rising. Do I get concerned that there's a point where it can tip? Absolutely. And so while right now I've taken the temperature, I think 3 times in the market study for Bill, and I probably will take it another 8 times between now and the time, should he be so fortunate to get the required permits to break ground, but we check that constantly to ensure that it continues to work. In addition to the fact that the project has parking as an amenity and modern units with walk-in closets, it also will contain the other things that you'd find in a project of this nature today. Because, in fact, those are what really the market demands. Yes, it has the pool, it will have the fitness center, Everybody likes to go in and see that they could exercise. I can't tell you that necessarily everybody in the project will exercise, and nor do we require. The other thing is we will have a dog park. Somewhere around 40 to 45% of residents today have animals. And so I tell the story, though some of my clients will yell at me, I tell it too much, is in the projects I'm involved in, we go so far as taking the DNA of every dog that's brought onto the property if they want to be a resident. Why? Because if we find a mess, the first time it's a $100 fine, the second time it's $200, and the third time you're subject to eviction. And what that does is help self-police the fact that in fact the project stays clean and suitable. So we'll create a dog park. We'll create a community garden. That's been the new rage in projects lately, and honestly, you can't put enough of them up to the resident level. And what's really exciting about this project is both the reuse of the land that exists here, that right now is just there as a cliff and a big hole, so to speak, in the ground, is the fact that it also abuts all these open areas in the back where residents will have access to the trail system that I understand exists throughout the project, and that it is intended to respect the environment. We recognize that there's been much discussion about what it surrounds, and there was at one point, I know in one of the approvals for the quarry refilling was issues about and questions about turtles. I mean, it's been studied to death, and you all will have your opportunity to look at this information again. But the project was designed with the intent to recognize all that. There are a lot of other things we understand that are important, and one of the things is that we applied to mass housing for our site eligibility letter, which is really the first step in the 40B from the proponent standpoint. And then mass housing goes through, first is they ask the town for comments. And many towns, some of them can issue almost the same comments per town, but there were very specific things of concern that were expressed by this town in the initial response back to mass housing. They were, for instance, to emergency access. They were concerned about deadheading one driveway to access a project of this size. And the answer is, well, we've designed it so that, in fact, we will have an emergency gate in Nelson Street, because honestly, if an ambulance is required, by all means, we don't want any chance for emergency equipment ever to be blocked from getting into the site. As we discussed before, the concept of a looped water system. I recognize that. Ultimately, there'll have to be hydrant tests and pressures, but it's my understanding there's lots of pressure here, so it's not an issue of whether or not that'll work. Traffic. We, earlier on, took it upon ourselves to have GPI do a traffic study. I mean, that again, there's no question that'll be peer reviewed, and we welcome that. But there's sort of this view of 192 households, they must generate a huge amount of traffic. Well, there's no question that they generate some traffic, but it's surprising that the impacts are far less than you imagine. But that's what the peer review process is. You can't take our necessary word or our expert, and of course I would expect you to be able to evaluate that as well. And the last thing that was cited as one of the main items was a concern about the endangered species and the biological diversity. Again, the filling of the quarry in itself triggered all those studies and evaluations, because what Bill was suggesting they do, obviously had grave concerns, changing back the topography and how you do that and do it correctly. And just for those who wonder how you can actually do that, yes, if for every foot of fill that you bring in, and they're very specific of what fill can go in, it's then rolled and compressed, because what we're talking about is trying to raise it to a certain elevation to be able to get to a flat plateau. So the answer is yes. Of course, that structurally it has to be done correctly, otherwise it's all for a waste of time. There were things that were cited in the town response, and in mass housing issued a site eligibility letter early July, which are things that we are open to discuss, which are issues about the sewer, and to ensure that the water is adequate, and those are, again, important things that the town expressed in their response to mass housing, and mass housing reiterated as you have seen, in their letter that came back when they issued site eligibility act. It's really our goal to spend whatever time is necessary to work slowly through the issues. This is a major project. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's easy. I've been involved in it before. I know the mechanics of it, but the answer is, it's your community, and I know that the issues and impacts of a project like this are of grave concern in that. And we recognize, and while it was expressed that, yes, you all have, according to statute, 180 days to render, but ours is not here. We're not here to pressure or cram down. We recognize that reports that will need to be done, and the 6 categories I had written down beforehand, I agree with you. Those are really the issues to be discussed. And if you tell me that, hey, to get out of the go, you need 4 weeks to get the guy up and running, and before you're ready to talk about something, we're here trying to do friendly. Bill and his family live in this town, have lived in this town for a long time, and I said to him early on, I said, you take huge risk. You're the guy coming to your own town to talk about a big project. People will either love you or they're going to hate you. And, and it tends to projects elicit emotion. I mean, it's understandable. And so, I made sure we took the litmus test because I think that was a tremendous burden that he was going to carry doing it. And therefore, we are trying to do it carefully. We're trying to do it correctly. We're trying to not process does not require us to fully engineer a site. We know that ultimately that anything that you might do if you're a favorable or conditional approval would be, of course, subject to lots of things being done that long before construction commences, and ultimately this would be a controlled site, meaning it would architects and mechanical people and site people all issuing affidavits to ensure that it's done correctly. There is no shortcuts when you're building a project of this nature. It's Bill's intention and his families and his partners to own this for a period of time. They see the benefits of it. They are not putting up their house for sale and moving and running someplace else. They're here because they're rooted in the community and believe it's important. They're active in the community, and so I'm going to be the spokesman. You're going to get to know each other, I'm sure, over time. And I'm happy to answer your questions, to go back and provide any detail you want. But tonight I figured an overview would be a good starting place as to the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, let me do one other thing here. So, again, this is the project that shows the overview. Again, at this scale, when you're showing 38 acres, the buildings look, it's hard to understand proportion, okay? But really, right now, the edge of the quarry is up in this face in here. So this is the area that we're talking about developing. We have another closer one that shows what happens in terms of circulation. And one of the things we know that's important to fire is to make sure they have, yes, adequate circulation, that all their vehicles can move correctly. And I do agree, probably police and fire is a pretty good step as a starting point to discuss those issues. So we have looked at that as well, too. The reason that we went all the way to New Jersey to work with an architect is because I've known Gate 17 for a long time. If anybody knows the Tewksbury Country Club on 38, that owner developed the Balsam Place, same architect in there, and he's done some other projects. He does nothing more than 4,000 or 5,000 units a year nationwide. That's all he does. And so what we like working with him, and there are still tweaks to what this facade will look like. These are renderings, and so don't take them with absolute, is that he understands the industry, he understands what the consumer wants, understands proper construction techniques, and so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We get the benefit of his knowledge in trying to apply it to ensure that these are really beautiful layouts. Corner units especially have these wonderful hallways and lots of glass. We put oversized glass in these units now because we want to create space. We want people to have light. I personally think that the top of this thing, once developed, it's going to be, a beautiful spot, and people will come to it. It's a choice, and they will come to it. So, sorry, Bill, thank you for pointing that out. Now I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, questions?
Yes, do we have anything in particular we want to comment or questions to raise that either may or may not be answerable at the moment? board?
Why does everybody look at me?
You got like a list of like 40 things there.
But they're all like, you got them, right? Have it.
Plus
So-
you're first in line, so.
That's true. So I do have some questions, overall questions about the project, and that, I think, I just want to get out in the open from the beginning, that way we can sort of address them, and maybe address them at the later meetings if those are questions, maybe things that you would know, that there are questions of ours that you might want to come with your experts to have answers to the questions.
Absolutely.
So, couple of things. So, obviously, there are environmental issues, right? We're not environmental experts, so I know that we're going to need some assistance in that department, right? That's not what I do for a living. I don't think anyone here does either. So, as part of that process, one of the things I did was I went to the Conservation Commission here to see, you know, if you guys had applied with them, like what your sort of, the status of the site was, if they had given you some sort of order of,
No,
or,
it's too early for order of conditions. So
Right.
the
I
only
meant,
conversation with conservation has been to the pit.
so the conversation I had with Mike Dempsey was that, that you guys had been with Conservation and had addressed issues from filling the quarry and all of that, but as far as the actual project was concerned, now that you have this plan, he requested that maybe you go through an RDA process with him, just make sure that you guys are all covered. And then, as part of that process, in the end, we'll sort of have an environmental meeting as one of our meetings, and maybe just incorporate anything that they might have.
You have to mic it, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill Daly, 7 Hemlock Lane, Groveland. So we'll file a new notice of intent when it comes time, during this process, because we will be going into the 100-foot buffer.
Well,
in
that's
the
what
Loveland,
he was
so-
thinking, is
And
that
the
that
other
would
stuff,
happen.
the other order conditions was closed out with a certificate of compliance. That was
Yes, and that's what he
previous
told me.
owner stuff, so that was all done correctly. And natural heritage for the endangered species stuff, that's in the packages, that was in the application.
Yep.
The CMP, Conservation Management Permit, that's all squared away with the Blanding's turtle, and I think there's another species on there, but that's
Right,
all squared away. There's turtle fences up, there's been turtle sweeps, there's been all that, you know, and I think it's every few months that they come back and look at it, but that's already been worked through. There's nothing else to talk about with endangered species. It's all in the Conservation Management Permit.
right, and I think his concern was more about,
Yeah,
because
just the
the
wetland.
configuration
Right.
changed, and you're you're closer to the stormwater on the other side, I guess, now, so
Well, they're
he just
two
wants
different
the buffer zone.
So the endangered species and the wetlands are two totally separate.
I don't disagree with you. I just want to make sure that you have sort of crossed your
Yeah.
T's and
Yeah,
dotted your I's
we'll
with
be-
the
we'll
other
be filing
departments
a
that
new
you need
notice
to
of
do.
intent.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Is there a current order of resource area delineation for the site?
We've had some of it delineated for the last order conditions, and the flags are actually still out there, but there'll be more.
But is that still current, or is that expired? The prior
I would
order of
say-
resource area delineation?
I would say some's current, but there'll definitely be a new delineation and a new notice
I
of
mean,
intent.
that's something that I think would behoove you to have done
Sure.
during the course of this process, not
I
necessarily.
have it all.
Not necessarily filing for the notice of intent. You can do that at the same time as this, or you can wait until after you determine whether or not you're
I
gonna
think
get
the
a permit.
delineation is still, because natural heritage required it also in the
Okay.
back, so
So it's something to look into, because, you know, everything you're showing here is up for grabs if the wetlands lines have changed at some point. So it's always beneficial
Yeah.
to have those set in stone as you go through this process, and that's what getting the order of resource area
yeah, we
delineation
could
does.
get going on that, sure.
Okay.
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, he said it's just basically a determination. They just look at the plans and then determine whether you need to move forward or not.
Yeah,
And it'd be nice,
absolutely.
I think, for me personally, just as a board member, to know whether you're all set with that. That's all.
be doing a notice of intent, no question.
No, but I think the question is different. We will go reach out to conservation earlier and address, I think, the concern you have regarding the process and making sure we've established what is required, because this is a little bit unusual in the fact that they're filling a quarry up. So there's topography changes that are occurring as a result of that, so does the hydrology, the drainage, and all that other stuff. So I appreciate the comments, and we recognize that that's part of the process.
Most importantly, you just need to know where your wetland lines are, because it's difficult really to get too far into the process without having those set.
Well, that we already know they are, because you couldn't go fill the quarry up unless they were established. I think what Bill's reaction was a little bit, or maybe we were implying that, will the development and the filling change those wetland lines? And the answer is, we'll have a conversation with conservation, and we'll
That's
make
all.
sure.
It
Yeah,
just-
absolutely.
At least open the conversation and then see what they say, and then
Correct.
I think it'd just be easier if you do it as part of the process, then we
Mm-hmm.
can sort of fold everything all in together, and it just makes life a little bit easier going forward for everyone.
Not a problem. The order of conditions, of course, and you can't do that until our engineer
Right,
back.
right, I knew that.
So what we've done there, just so you're aware, is one of the things that I always have a concern about sites is, you know, in the old days, they used to chicken scratch on a napkin and submit for a 40B and say that's enough. And so the problem is that you go down the road later and then you're like, well, how are you going to make that work? So one of the things to Millennium was, well, we don't need you to get completed because there's many discussions we all have to have and it may impact the project, was, you know, go take the test and make sure you can lay out how this would all work from his standpoint. The answer is it passed the test and we have what we think is the rough ways in which drainage will be dealt with on the site. You know, the rest of it is just part of our discussion and evolution of the plans.
I just want to make sure we cover that, that's all.
Appreciate
I was
that.
on my, file the RDA. The question, I was just sort of curious, really. How do you envision, are you gonna general contract the whole thing? You gonna do sort of have someone just come in and build the whole thing for you? How does that work?
Well, to be quite honest, and I like Bill, we've become friends through this process, he's not qualified. So so the answer is that while Bill is certainly qualified to do the site work and the piping work, and that's his business, the answer is sure, we're gonna look to that as a cost savings. Based on the personality of my friend, I have no doubt he'll be micromanaging with me the construction, but we have to go out. When you go out to a lender of a project like this, they're going to require, not necessarily bonds, but they're going to require, you know, financial statement of the builder to make sure they can actually perform, which we're concerned about too, so,
Okay.
no.
Well, some do design build, but obviously you've sort of got it designed, so that leaves like who's building, that's
Yeah,
all.
well, you know, this is, again, it's not a hard structure to build, but at the same time, it's a controlled job, meaning it requires architect's affidavits, mechanical affidavits, there's more affidavits that will be issued, you know, between the start and the finish to make sure that in fact it's done correctly. It's the only way your building department can probably even tolerate it, because it's hard to be there and know everything. That's why you rely upon affidavits.
Well, and I think it's difficult to be the owner and the builder at the same time. I just, yeah. It gets a little muddy that way, and it's hard to do it that way. You'll probably thank yourself later for doing it that way. And then I did have a question about, maybe just sort of explain for the group, for everyone, how the tenant selection part of it works, and as
Sure.
far as the affordable portion of it, and how that system,
So there's two parts to it. First off, affordability always has to be tested pursuant to mass regulations. So there's a whole process that one goes to do it. But more importantly is the initial lease up of the property. It requires local preference. So local preference is a process in which the developer, upon the units coming online, first looks to the local community and goes through a lottery system and advertisements and stuff and work sessions to first offer to make sure that people within the community who are looking for this type of housing have the first preference for that. Once that process is done, and if it does not yield you occupancy of all your affordable units, then you're open up to continue. I envision in this process that, you know, that especially during lease-up, that we will have third-party management who's qualified and done this before, because it's not difficult, but it's a lot of paperwork to do it correctly. So, and then you have to go through an annual basis to test each person, because a person may qualify for affordability today or affordable unit doesn't mean they will necessarily in the future. And there's a whole formula about, up to a certain point, they can remain, it's still deemed affordable. At one point, though, they may cross the line and no longer qualify, in which case you then need to, at your earliest possible moment, designate a replacement unit that becomes now one of your affordable units. So you need to maintain the minimum. Am I describing this generally as an overview correctly? Or do you want to
Yes,
enhance?
I did want to make a couple of clarifications.
Sure.
So with regard to the local preference, the maximum amount that can be reserved for local preference is 70% of the units, and that's a federal requirement. However, the town does not automatically get to require that entire 70%. What you would do is you would put in your decision that up to 70% of the units shall be set aside as local preference units, but ultimately it's the subsidizing agency that gets to determine. And essentially, it's a fair housing question. The town will need to provide evidence of the need for that local preference before the state will allow you to go up to that 70%.
And so how do you demonstrate that need?
Well, for one thing, you have a housing production plan,
Yes.
right? So that housing production plan would be required to show the local need for the units. So you would look to that. If you have a housing authority that has units, has a waiting list, is always something that's very helpful in terms of establishing the need for local
Or
preference.
regional housing that might be applicable here?
And they will also, there's also a scope of what that local preference can contain. You can't just say it's limited to one certain subgroup and that's it. And it might not simply be it's for current residents of Groveland, it might be people who work in Groveland, or something that's more than just existing residents. And again, that's something that you would work through with the subsidizing agency. With regards to the lottery and affordable affirmative fair marketing, that's something that the subsidizing agency will require as part of the final approval process. And that final approval process occurs after the end of your process, after a comprehensive permit has been issued. They have to go back to the subsidizing agency and get final approval. And that's a big part of what they look at during that process. So the applicant is going to be required to have, retain somebody that has experience in drafting an affirmative fair housing marketing plan, that has experience in running a lottery for the affordable units. And then the discussion about what happens afterwards was absolutely correct in terms of, that all applies to the initial rent out. But then once the building is up and operating, or the buildings are up and operating, you're going to have vacancies, and so you're gonna be looking at your list of people who have been previously qualified, and you just be choosing from that. The local preference only applies in the initial rent out. It does not apply to anything afterwards. You are going to have situations where tenants are going to, hopefully, get to the point where they are exceeding the requirements for being in a unit. Some people, things are gonna change, they're gonna start making more money, and they're no longer gonna qualify as an affordable unit. That doesn't mean that they get kicked out of their unit. What it means is that the applicant for the next available unit that becomes available for rent will have to set that aside and make that an affordable unit, and the other one becomes a market rate unit.
So they're not designated to particular unit numbers, not,
So
Initially,
they will be,
Initially, yes.
they will be with
But
the
it doesn't
initial,
stay.
that is part of the final approval process. They will have to designate which units are affordable, and that's because the subsidizing agency wants to make sure they're evenly dispersed throughout the project, but they can change, and that would be the process where it would happen.
And just to add to, and thank you, that was much more eloquent than I did. So the other thing is that the developer at that point in time also enters into a regulatory agreement.
Yes, that's part
Okay,
of the
and that
final
regulatory agreement is very specific as to not just the initial but ongoing reporting and ways in which the project to be structured. I mean, this is affordability in perpetuity, so it's nothing that the developer down the road can change. And so it's very important, and it's, as stated, there are a number of documents that get done through the final application stage, in addition to needing actually financing at that point, before a project actually can get to the point where it has a building permit.
Thank you both for answering my question. I had a feeling that a lot of people in town had that same question, so I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to really explain how that works.
To play in 40B at all, and I know my friend here will also laugh at it, you have to be a pretty good bureaucrat, because there are a lot of little subtleties, and over the years, it wasn't that way in the early stages of it, and, you know, there were issues. There was, especially in the for sale models, and since then, it's become a lot more, you know, strict. It's been enough units now that, you know, there's a pattern to it, and it's no more of those kind of errors, so.
Thank you. I think some of the questions I had were actually answered as part of your presentation, so I just want to make sure I have. And then, I had that answered already. That's awesome. You talked about number of school children. I know you mentioned that quickly. So have you guys actually looked at any of what you forecast the amount of school children might be? Based
Well,
on a formula,
yeah,
right?
well,
Based on the bedrooms, right?
It's a formula. So the first thing is, I think you should understand what statements and requests are made regarding the economics of the project. If you don't mind, explain to them how that sort of functions. Because, I mean, there's a Rutgers study that was done that a lot of municipalities in this Commonwealth use, though it's becoming a little old, that talks about just the unit type, and it's a multiplier. And so, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank, but yes, we did run it out.
Okay.
In there. But that's, I'm gonna be quite honest, that's not what I've experienced in other projects. But, you know, again, it's statistics.
Exactly, because I'm sure that a lot of people have the same question. So I'm just trying to get some of the general questions out there that I know a lot of people have, who maybe can't be here or whatever, so I'm just trying to get some of those. And I know that as part of the eligibility letter, there were concerns, so I just want to make sure, I know you addressed some of them, so I just want to make sure we go over all of them. Actually, you know what, let me get the actual letter out.
I tried to take
These
the
are just my
highlights,
notes,
but,
and they're not quite, oh, thank you. He's so handy. All right. So the concerns were, number one, the municipality noted that the site plan lacks a secondary or emergency egress, resulting in impacts to the public safety due to limited access for public safety vehicles, which I believe you've addressed with
Already
the Nelson
revised,
Street.
yes.
So I just sort of want to tick them off. Let's see what's addressed, what's not,
Happy.
what's still outstanding.
absolutely.
The municipality is concerned with the significant upgrades required on Sewell Street to accommodate the proposed development. Is that part of,
Well, I'm not really sure where the concern was. I mean, in Sewell Street, we have legal abilities to make the improvements. We can get to the required widths and dimensions. And I think that what I might suggest there is that the adequacy of that drive as it reaches Salem Street is probably going to be something your traffic engineer will probably take a look at. So I'm aware of the comment, and we should probably just discuss it as we evolve through
at
the traffic.
meeting? That's
traffic.
fine with me. I just want to go through the list, and then let's sort it out, figure out which night we should discuss it, if
Yes.
that's all right with you.
That's fine.
The municipality noted the need for improved pedestrian access into and out of the site and a pedestrian connection to adjacent streets and sidewalks.
We are going to provide sidewalks throughout our project. It wasn't an issue zone, but yes, there will be sidewalks down, and we will advance the discussion with the town regarding where they go after that.
Okay, thank you. The municipality is concerned that the project will result in increased traffic volume and congestion on Salem Street and Route 97. The municipality was also concerned with public safety impacts due to the close proximity of the site to A.W. Chesterton Company, which employs approximately 600 employees, particularly during peak traffic hours. So, to me, that sounds like traffic,
It's
right?
traffic,
Right.
it's all in the traffic report, and I have no doubt the peer review will earn their keep in this one.
All right. I just want to make sure that we sort of categorize everything, and, because I want to make sure that we take care of all the department's concerns
I agree.
as a part of the process. The municipality expressed concern about the applicant's failure to provide a looped water system plan that could provide reliable water supply for public safety needs, incorporate appropriate redundancy, and provide adequate pressure during emergencies.
So that goes back to, we know we have a hydrant test that will be done, but we've provided the loop water system as well. And it's my understanding that the pressure is more than adequate in the area, so it shouldn't be an issue, but I agree that That'll be part of our discussion as we get towards, I think that would be under probably civil.
Civil utilities,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. The municipality is concerned that the proposed project is located among town and state-owned properties that protect endangered species habitat, contain large fish and game reserve, and provide passive recreation and trails for public use. So, I think that would fall under environmental.
Yeah, I think you had a category called wetlands. I would suggest we expand that to include habitat simultaneously.
That's
And,
what I would like to do too, do it all at once.
And I'm not sure how you want to approach that from reviews, since it was really reviewed extensively in conservation as part of the process. So, you know, we're all in favor of the fact that you all should be educated to this issue as well. But I would hope that we would not just redo it all over again to work that was done during the permitting for the quarry. So I'm sure we could work that out.
The municipality believes the proposed project would adversely impact biological diversity and existing natural resources through excessive regrading of the site.
Well, considering the site right now is a big hole in the cliff, where we talk about flattening, and I'm not sure I understand that, but again, I think during both civil and then wetlands categories, that we can once again touch upon that point during that time period.
The municipality is concerned that the existing topography of the site will create significant construction-related challenges, including grading, stormwater management, and groundwater impacts.
We've done our analysis. We don't believe that's the case. We'll discuss it during, again, civil, I think, review at that point in time.
The municipality has expressed concern with the project's compliance with eligibility requirements such as site control pursuant to 760 CMR 56.04, 1C.
Well, we submitted in response to the town comments to Mass Housing, a letter from attorney demonstrating that we had it. I presume that Mass Housing at that point, if they were believing that we didn't have site control, you know, would have questioned during their legal review of the site eligibility. Well, we've given you a copy of that letter. I'm not so sure, and you should ask council if there's still a concern relative to it. But we have demonstrated title to all these properties is already in place. There was a period somewhere back in February where they hadn't closed on the last parcel, but all parcels are owned today.
Thank you. And that was the end of the list, so that was easy. Just want to get them on the record, basically.
Appreciate it.
Okay? Those were all. And I think the big question, which I'm sure we will address during civil, is sewer versus septic versus how you're gonna handle wastewater, right?
Right.
Because I think that is a big question for everyone. So that'll be interesting. Can't wait for that meeting. So,
And as we schedule it up, then we will schedule our experts to come too. We didn't do that tonight because we knew you didn't have experts here either, so.
right. So that was sort of our intent, is to try to make it as organized as possible, so you, for the developer, for the board, so we can sort of study up on those subjects prior to the meeting, and also have any department heads that we would like to have join us.
Absolutely.
And to address any concerns.
And if you send us on an assignment to talk to a department head, we're happy. Our goal is to come in here and be productive every meeting with you all.
I would like that too, because I don't want to be here forever talking about it. I'm sure you guys don't either.
Well, you might find me entertaining after a while, but maybe not.
I think that was it for my general list. Do you guys have any general project questions?
Nothing generally for me. I'm sure there'll be questions specifically when we go through each of the topics.
John?
Yeah, that's how I feel. We'll address them as we go.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to actually just cover, and I know it's probably spelled out in here somewhere, that, so your intentions, and obviously this is not set in stone, but for 192 units is to go with the defined 10% as 3 bedrooms. And you do have plans, so I'm assuming there's a ratio of the 1 versus 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, generally, after you take off 10% for 3 bedrooms, they're roughly, I mean, I could tell you the exact number, but they're roughly split evenly which is generally what the market requires. And during lease-up, you can go to one project and all the 2 bedrooms lease up first. You go to another one and all the 1 bedrooms, and I have never quite figured out why that's the case. It's a little bit, indicative of the market. So
Yeah, it's
there
more
are
of
floor
a-
plans to support that. At some point in architecture, we're happy to share with you some of the floor plans, and if need be, I'll even drag the architect up here happily. He's to explain anything else about the construction and the type. What's interesting that you should remember is with an elevated building, and while we also have a requirement to make certain units ADA compliant, which we will, but it makes them all ADA accessible. See, that makes the entire building ADA accessible. So we think that that's a real plus in an elevated building. And while elevators cost $100,000 or the benefits it creates to allow that kind of access, it really does allow, for instance, the over 55 to age a little bit more in place and to deal with whatever life may have for them.
Yeah, I mainly asked for 2 reasons. One is to loosely address your question of, children, because obviously somebody living in a 1-bedroom is very unlikely to have children.
Very unlikely.
But also to address that, that kind of question of what kind of demographics are you really expecting? Is there a lot of demand? Have your study shown a lot of demand for 1-bedrooms or a good mix of,
Well,
everything?
Generally, a project mixes it up because, so much of it has to do with, a young couple just starting out who's looking for A-class apartment living, can't necessarily afford 2-bedroom yet, and they may start off in a 1-bedroom, and then it's the one that suddenly wants to have a kid. And what's interesting in the evolution of apartment industry, it used to be in a 2-bedroom apartment, you would go down a hallway off the kitchen living area, and it'd be 1 bedroom next to each other. That having standpoints and so now the idea is you have a central core living area, and then you have the bedrooms on either side of that. So there's a whole, way in which these things are developed today to be more appealing to what the market requires. But by doing that, then you also have the possibility of roommates, right? Because roommates next to each other, it doesn't work as well as being on opposite sides. And by the way, all units will have washers and dryers and all that other stuff. So, so that's why it's, but predicting exactly which one would be hotter, the 1 or 2-bedroom, I wish my crystal ball was that clear. But we do believe that the mix is correct.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, which is not necessarily pertinent now, but will be, I think, as we get into the architecture, is just if you've done any massing diagrams that show kind of a 3-dimensional space of the site and how this size of a building will sit in the existing area. I don't know if you've.
I'll
have
talk
your
to my
architect draw
various
any-
people and see if they have the
It doesn't need to
technology.
be fancy or anything, but
Right.
just kind of a, rather than actual model, just kind of a 3-dimensional drawing to give some scope of how a building of this scale will fit among the general, topography and everything of the site.
I'll talk to the Paris. I'm sure they said they have 3D modeling somewhere in those computer programs. So,
It's usually pretty simple for them to do it once they've got all the data in there, so it's.
plus they get to charge you extra.
Well, for a basic one, it shouldn't be much, hopefully.
Any
You'll
other-
eventually have to do it for everything else anyway, but.
Yeah, I know. Well, I do a lot of medical stuff for hospitals, and now we take people on 3D tours of how and where and things to get rooms, it's crazy.
Any other
That's
questions?
all the
from-
questions I have. I do want to just go back over the plans in terms of what we want to cover in each, the expected scope of the meetings. Do you want to do that now? And the
Sure.
dates?
You want to do the next one? Instead of all.
Well,
Yeah, well, I'd like to at least set a scope so that we can plan, any experts or whatever.
Well, Mr. Chair, can I offer a,
tentatively,
can I
but
offer a
obviously this isn't
suggestion?
set in stone, so we can flex it based on who's available when and.
Can I offer a suggestion? You're going to want to peer review certain aspects of your 6 categories. And so I think you might want to first secure that contract and see when their performance, how quickly they can perform too. So while I don't mind setting it, and I certainly have no problem coming here and seeing you all quite regularly, In all fairness to you all and respecting the fact that this is a very busy time out there in these trades, and I'm finding that it's hard to get performance, maybe you might want to, I mean, police and fire to me is the easier one that doesn't require outside expertise. And then I think you need to give us the list and let's see what you can do for getting somebody to peer review it. That may drive the decision on when.
Yeah, I think our list basically covers police, fire, and traffic, which, if we go with TEC, I think they're pretty good with traffic, we've seen.
Well, I think Rebecca said there were three companies.
So there's three companies that we had gone out for an RFQ, for a general RFQ for on-call services for the planning board and the town. But because each firms have different disciplines, I wanted to reach out to them to make sure that they could cover all of the disciplines and or where they were lacking, and whether or not they would be able to perform the abilities of reviewing a 40B at this point in time among their firm. And the only one that got back to me was TEC. TEC said that they had in-house capabilities of doing traffic, civil, stormwater. They would actually subconsult out for wetlands and architectural, but they would put it under their umbrella if the town would prefer to approach it in that manner, so that they have one project management person and contact that the applicant and or the town can work with. And that during that process of selecting that subconsultant, the board would also have the ability to review with the applicants to make sure that they were amenable to both parties.
Yeah, we'd like to see the qualifications, because a one-stop all shop doesn't necessarily always have all the right expertise, so
Of course.
I wouldn't mind seeing that
I have that
in there.
information and I can forward that over to you this
Great.
evening.
Thank you.
So then I guess we can't vote on who we're gonna use then, if you're gonna review that, and then we haven't gotten any information from anyone else either.
We'll fund an account anytime you're ready. Now that we opened up the hearing, I think legally we can now fund a peer review account. So as soon as you can ascertain what we need to do, we certainly can get through that part of it as well.
Are you familiar with TEC?
I'm familiar with it, but when somebody says that they're one stop for all, it just makes me want to really look down and just make sure that they, in fact, can do all that as well too. I'm not going to stop you guys.
Well,
You
do
have
we-
your preferences, but
I mean, there's no reason we have to go with one for all.
We do not. We have
So-
Brighton Pierce on call as well as,
Camet.
And then the other contractor that we had, that answered back to the RFQ was Stantec, but we just don't have a signed contract at this point in time, but they are interested in working with the town. So, since it's not the planning board and or a town project and this is separate, if we're amenable to that, we can also, see whether or not there's any additional expertise that would be, agreed upon by the applicant for them to review.
we won't be hard. Just want to take a look. We got to do that, to be responsible, but we want to help you guys.
So can we say that at the next hearing, that we would make that decision and have that stuff hopefully that would be the plan to
Do
have?
we want to schedule 2 weeks for a short meeting to do that specifically?
Well, I would like to do police and fire, maybe we could do that.
Well, yeah.
We do have
We can
capacity
certainly,
issues with the fire department right now in terms of the leadership and the stepping down of the interim fire chief at this point in time. So I think that for a conversation point, if the board and the applicant are amenable, to proceed with those conversations at the next Wednesday of the month. And then at that point in time, we'll definitely have a chance to share with the applicant all the peer review, and then moving forward with whatever the board wants to do, 1 meeting a month, 2 meetings a month. But maybe just because of the momentum and getting all of this situated, it might be best to meet the next Wednesday, which would be the 21st.
The fire chief is leaving at the end of August?
The interim fire chief is going to be stepping down as the chief and returning back to his position as, I believe, a captain. So then that leaves the chief position unattended, or I guess unattended or not filled or vacant. There we go.
so I guess that's the question, do we wait until it's filled? Or do we squeeze it in and hope that we get through it before the end of the month? Yeah,
My
Well,
preference
I
would
don't
be to try to fill it in now, because
yeah.
he's been on the job for a while, probably has experience,
Mhm.
as opposed to a new chief coming in, let's say from another town, they're gonna have to sort of start from scratch, and I think
Yeah.
that might be a little more challenging.
And he's still a member of the fire department and still very well versed in
Yeah.
what Groveland does and needs.
In a lot of towns, actually, the chief is not the one that would do the commentary. They usually give that off to somebody else who does code enforcement and kind of things. So,
It's kind of the chief.
China chief.
Well, I just, before there's a lot of changeover and turmoil over there, I'd rather try to,
Yeah, so-
plus they don't need peer review, which is easy, you know, like we can do that first, and it gives us more time to do peer review.
So we plan on the 21st of August. We'll plan on covering police and fire at that time and finalizing the peer review decisions.
I agree.
I just looked at
Is
my
that-
schedule,
does
works
that
for me too,
schedule work
yeah.
for you? And the applicant? Okay. Rebecca, will you be able to make it? Paul?
I'm available, I've already
You-
put it in my calendar.
Oh, okay, good.
And I have talked to town council, which is KP Law, and Amy Kessler.
Questle.
Russell
Questle.
will be able to attend that meeting as well.
Okay. Then that sounds like a plan. Take them one bite at a time, right?
I would request a continuance until the 21st.
Anything else before we,
Actually,
on that?
one thing I wanted to do is just get on the record of what, and we can kind of discuss this a little bit, of what we want each of these topics to really, I mean, these are broad topics brought in. Do we want to just quickly discuss exactly what we define these topics as, so that we have it on the record publicly, so that the public knows when they might be interested and when they might not be?
okay.
I can quickly read the broad definitions that they give in the Mouse Housing Partnership Handbook. So they cover traffic, which is, I think, pretty obvious from our perspective. Civil engineering, which includes the peer review, involves assistance from the developer's site plan, proposed cuts and fills, earth removal, stormwater management, water and waste, infrastructure, proposed waivers of local bylaws and ordinances, and as well as we include the utilities and within that, electrical, water, and
Sewer.
yeah, well, that's storm, that's wastewater.
I know, I'm just, I can't, that's the one I can't wait
I
for.
suspect we'll probably cover storm, wastewater and storm in a little bit, primarily in the civil, but it will also probably flow over into the wetlands as well, I'm guessing, so. Environmental impacts, which includes the wetlands, it includes the endangered species, and just general overall, even, any other concerns about the area and the environment in that area beyond the wetlands too. And then the last category is architectural, which is really about reviews, the impact on the buildings and the surrounding areas, the architectural designs, the concepts of the layouts and the site plan, and this is where things like the scale of the building versus the sites, the design of the look of the building and the feel of the building, and the as well as things of the terms of what's the word I'm looking for, concerns about accessibility and all that kind of stuff. So it's general architecture subjects.
As long as we're not discussing pink versus blue bathrooms, we're okay.
That's internal, it's-
Maybe after pink, you can just go now.
I do have one more thing, may I? I would like to do a site visit.
yes.
I'd like to take a walk on the site.
We would like that too.
Yeah, and I'd rather do that sooner rather than later. I personally did go for the initial during the project eligibility, but none of the other members were able to attend at that time. And the whole site was covered in snow. So it'd be nice to sort of get a better idea of,
Yeah, that's no problem.
Would-
Anytime you want, it's an active site, remember, you know, with the lot of trucks and
Well,
equipment around,
But may I offer a
I'd like to
suggestion?
schedule a formal site visit so that we can have a public site visit effectively, so that if any neighbors or whatever want to, we can kind
Well-
of constrain that to that
No,
time.
Yeah, that's a liability question. When we did it, again, we had this issue with the selectmen too. We were very careful about that. You know, it's an active site and there's lots of stuff. I don't want to preclude you all because I think you need to gain perspective. But I don't think this is an open to the public issue. You know, I wouldn't want somebody to be hurt. That being said, if we're meeting on the 21st and being that it's still light out a little bit late here, we could certainly as one option do it before we come back here to actually meet. That's one option while the weather's nice.
I'm open to it, if you wanna meet out there on a Saturday morning, whatever
yeah,
day
we
I
are
feel like
sort of
we can make
volunteer,
it.
you know, we all have
Yeah.
day jobs,
Right,
you know?
right.
So it gets a little-
I mean, if you wanna do it on some night after work, I'm working in Andover, I can meet you guys over there, it's not a problem, but when you start bringing anyone that wants to see it, we can't do that, you know, it's just, like, it's 1,000 people show up, I can't, there's a 60-foot cliff in there, there's locks, there's drop-offs everywhere, we have a problem at the base in that area, but not in the side, you know.
Right, I see what you're saying, yeah.
But whatever works for you, I'll make it work, just you let Rebecca know, and get over there.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can figure it out right now.
Yeah,
Oop.
What do you think of the idea of meeting prior to the next meeting? So we start at 7:30, maybe meet there at 6 or 6:30, but I don't know what,
Yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily a good plan for me necessarily.
to like,
And I would say, of course, it's weather pending, because if it's raining, you don't really want to go take a walk out into the dirt.
Maybe get a look at it before the meeting, so you can think about it, what you saw, and, you know, instead of looking at it and talking about it. But
Saturday
either way.
might be good too, that way we can, I am sort of a little concerned about like trying to like rush through it, like, hey, we gotta get back because the meeting's at 7:30 and I don't wanna leave police and fire, you know.
The Saturday might work more better.
Would that work for you, a Saturday?
Yeah, he doesn't need me for that, so that's,
Week, 4 days, week, I'm gone.
6 a.m.
You provide coffee at 6 a.m., I hope.
Yeah, John just said Saturdays might be tough for him.
Saturdays might be tough for you. Are there any that
Do it.
might work for you?
More weekdays are much better for me.
I can meet
Even
up at 7
evenings,
o'clock.
I can do a weekday.
It would like Monday or Tuesday night before.
I'm
Work?
sorry?
Do it a little earlier on the 21st? Like 6
want
o'clock?
to do 5:30 and, you know,
Well,
an
that's a
hour on the
little hard
site,
for
and then
me
you
to
guys
get
get
back.
all break?
Because we all, you know, we're all
Yeah.
working and trying to get back to
Donuts.
town, you know, I think that's where we struggle a little bit, but,
But Monday or Tuesday, actually, sounds like a good idea, right before the meeting. But,
I could do the Monday, like the 12th or the 19th, I could do, I definitely can't do the 13th. And the 20th is when we're, oh, I could do the 20th too.
I can do the 20th.
Yeah, I mean, the 20th, I mean.
Tuesday.
The night,
either of
like
those.
basically the night
19th
before.
or 20th would work fine for me.
Yeah, 20th. Say works
Good
for
for
John.
me.
Works for you? 20th?
Oh,
20th?
wait a minute. Now
Does
just,
that 20th
now,
work for you?
what time is,
7 p.m.?
7 fine, you wanna do a little earlier, 6:30?
Starts to get
Yeah.
dark.
That's
Okay.
fine, whatever.
we want to make sure you can have the best visibility for footing.
Yeah. I don't know, we're discuss, hold on.
Before that, we have to.
I can do a little before, but what's your availability?
I mean, I can, you know, if you want to plan 6:30, then
That's
I'd
better.
probably be able to be there by 6:30. I mean, it's 2 minutes from my house, so it's
Yeah.
not really.
Well, because some of us, we work, so trying to get home and get back to town in time, so, but I can get back by 6:30.
It should work.
That's fine, I'm good.
All right, 6:30 on the 20th?
Yes, you want it catered?
You guys want to come?
Want to linger a little
I
bit?
don't think you need me.
No, but if you want to.
So, I will not be able to attend, but I would just advise that the board remember not to deliberate if there's four of you present on the
Right.
subject matter. And also, due to the process, I would recommend that you write down your questions or remember your questions and ask them in a public forum.
Okay, good point.
You're allowed to ask Bill about his kids. That's okay.
Say that one more
You're
time.
allowed to ask Bill about his kids if you want.
We'll videotape the
So
whole
what-
thing and put it on YouTube so that people can see that we didn't actually talk at all.
You could have a drone following you. So on a site visit, you are allowed to ask questions with regards to location of things. So, you know, the building is going to be here, where is the wetland line, that sort of thing. But anything else does need to be discussed during an open forum.
Thank you. I agree.
And we welcome it. It's an unusual site to go back and fill a quarry and talk about this. So you really have to see it to understand it.
I agree. From my walkthrough, my thought was everybody really should see the site,
Right.
just so that they understand the. Right, and like I said, it was covered in ice and snow, so it's a little harder to,
It was okay uphill.
use my imagination.
It was okay uphill. It was the downhill that was a little bit more risky.
Yes, that was for sure. Okay, glad we got that done. And then, anything else before their vote on the continuance?
I don't have anything.
Do you have anything that we need to do?
Do not
Make sure we're following procedure, doing what we need to do?
just vote for the continuance.
Okay. I guess I'll make a motion for the applicant to continue till August 21st at 7:30 PM here in this room.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We'll see you then. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bill, want to grab the board?
2 minutes.
Oh, yeah, we have other stuff to do too.
How much?
Well, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming and keeping us on track.
My pleasure. It's
Just
nice
jump
meeting
in
you all.
anytime you feel like we need to,
Thank you.
straightening out.
Keys here.
Everyone's leaving, they don't want to stay for the approval of minutes.
I know, they already watched it on
Say that one more
YouTube,
time?
so-
Everyone's leaving, they don't want to stay for the approval of last month's minutes.
Apparently not.
The fun stuff.
Species, issues, and wetlands.
All right. Do you have the minutes here?
You're not upset we didn't go to Mass Housing Partnership, are you?
I don't work for Mass Housing Partners.
Oh, you're just the outside
I'm
consultant
the
they have.
technical review consultant
No.
that they hire.
Okay.
And my name is on the list of multiple times.
I know, I've seen you before, I've seen your name, so, thank you. Thank you all.
Good night, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night now.
Just looking for the minutes I had, because I thought I had made a couple of notes on them. I guess not. I think there was like just one minor typo thing that I found anyway. make a motion to approve the minutes as drafted.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
No. We just were reviewing minutes.
The only other question I have in terms of the peer review choice, what do we still want to do in terms of,
Are we gonna
Well,
have to do
basically-
this piecemeal, Jason? Or,
So the, what I was gonna do, so I had reached out to Camet and I had reached out to, Wright and Pierce, like I had mentioned earlier, and they had not gone back to me, so I sent an email and I followed up with a phone call. I heard back from TEC. Stantec I did not reach out to because we don't have an official contact, but it just says I could reach out to them. So I just actually sent Elise an email with, Stantec to see what qualifications they have and if she could send us over something. So as soon as I get something, I can send it over to both Joel, from Equity Alliance with the applicant, and yourself. And also Paul Haverty had mentioned that he had worked in the past with somebody who, I forget the firm name, but has done wetlands and habitat. So I'll reach out to them and see if they can give us a qualifications list. I'll send that over to Joel as well as, the board. And then at the next meeting, I think you'll have enough to choose from to see exactly how you wanna go about it. The only reason we were thinking more along the lines of trying to combine it all is not necessarily that they could do everything in-house, but that it would be all managed under one person, so we didn't really have to worry about reaching out to multiple
Yes.
people and doing all that. But we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I was hoping that we were gonna be able to get all that for tonight so that we could get it rolling quickly, but it just didn't come together.
well, and you may have just covered this, do Conservation have somebody that they worked with to do, or whoever they worked with to do the original?
So, when I spoke
Or
with
do they
Mike
have
Dempsey,
somebody
he's the chair, if I'm not
talk to
mistaken.
regularly?
Mike Dempsey, is he the chair of Conservation?
Yes, he
He's
is.
the chair, right. So, he had said that they had gone through them because they had some issues from a prior owner before, Mr. Daly purchased the
Yep.
property.
Mhm.
So there was some outstanding issues closed out as far as filling the quarry, but now that they're changing it, it's not just filling the quarry now, they wanna do a project on top of it, that they really should just do a quick review, and that's what that RDA process is, and then,
Yes.
Mike also said that he would be willing to come to that meeting that we discuss environmental wetlands, so that he's hoping that they will file their RDA, they'll have a chance to look at the plans, and that when we get to that point, he'll have already reviewed everything, and that the commission will have already reviewed it and come to us with their recommendations. So we can sort of fold it all in together, as opposed to trying to, for us to do it when they're gonna end up doing it anyway, it just, I'd rather have them sort of incorporated into the whole process, that was my thought.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that they had, during the original process, had an outside consultant review it on behalf of the Conservation Commission. They do have an individual that they use for, a wetland scientist that they've used for other projects in town that they tend to
Yeah.
rely on. So what I can do too is I can reach out to the conservation agent tomorrow and also Mike Dempsey and see whether or not they have his qualifications and put those into the package to
Yeah,
see
I
whether or not you'd be amenable to
Include
using them
that,
as
'cause
well.
if we can align with Conservation through that whole I have no problem splitting that off from the peer review of the other parts.
Yeah, okay,
'Cause
I'm,
most of the, well,
I think
I'll
that's a
get
great
most of the
idea.
other parts are a lot
qualifications.
more related than that.
Hopefully I'll get a better response. So, but I will definitely
Well, they must
continue to
work
try
with
and.
peer review, and maybe they have somebody they really recommend, and I think that would be a really good idea.
Yes, I know the gentleman's name that they use, but I don't know what firm he's associated with, so I will definitely get that information and a qualifications form and send it over to you as well as the applicant and his team.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I think it's gonna be really important to get a strong person from the fire department too.
That's why I was trying to say, get somebody who's before
Yeah.
he leaves or steps down,
Yes.
like, let's get somebody who's really, because I think if you try to bring in a new chief, we've done this in the past, we've brought in chiefs from another town, and then
Yeah.
it takes them a little while to sort of get up to speed
I
and
think
figure
the-
out our town, and
And the interim chief has sat in on original meetings for this
I think
particular,
he's pretty
for this
sharp on that, so he may
project.
get the lead on that. I think two of the buildings only have access on three sides.
and I believe
You're
that was a
talking about a
concern.
6-story building here.
I think that was one of their concerns, so that's one of the reasons why I thought it'd be a good idea to get them in here early. Let's get those addressed quickly.
In case something has to be adjusted.
That was my thought, but, right?
Yes.
That's what
Agreed,
we
I
were
think that,
sort of
no, I think
thinking.
that's a great plan, I was just pushing the mic away, so
Oh.
Chris and I were just kind of sharing a glance, but no, for sure, I definitely agree, I think that's the best way to approach it, for sure.
Okay. Great. And who would, the police chief?
Yes, I believe it will be, the police chief and then the interim, fire chief, and I can, and extend the invite to other individuals within the departments if they would like to bring them along. So hopefully I'll have them to be able to commit to the date.
Yes, that's
Yep.
what I'm hoping to. So probably the sooner we get the invite out, the better.
I will send it this evening.
She's so efficient. Love it. Thank you. Anything else for open discussion?
Any hits on a fifth member?
I haven't heard anything. I know that they put the press release out about a couple of the boards not having enough members, and the ZBA was one specifically that they had called out, but I don't believe there's been any applications, or at least not that I've heard of.
Well, and I think at this point, if somebody, let's say, applies next month, they're sort of gonna miss it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's
so I
this,
think,
So it's not gonna impact this at this point.
so I think the four of us have to basically commit that it's just the four of us. And whoever comes along, they can probably sit in, but they probably can't vote. So I think the four of us just have to stick together and
I think we can
go
do
through it all.
I'm gonna be here.
Just decide,
But-
we're committed and
Yeah.
Yeah,
should be
Yeah.
committed.
we
One
should
other-
be
that's-
committed.
Well,
More
that's
like
one other thing I would address is, other applications that come in, how do we wanna slip those in? Do we basically say those are the priority? And try and get through those quickly at the beginning, or
That's
do
why I
we
was thinking,
wanna?
try to knock them out and then, because the other
So
stuff.
they don't
I mean, it
have to
depends on
sit
what it
through
is,
2 or 3
but-
hours or
Well,
something.
the other
Yeah.
stuff might drag on each meeting too, so
Yeah.
get those out of the way first and then move on to the other business.
I agree. The only thing I would say is that to sit with our regular deadline, so they have to have it in by the 10th of the month to get in on the first
Yeah.
Wednesday of the following month. So
Right.
I think if there are any other applications, we should do them on that first Wednesday
Yeah,
and
Yeah,
not like
that's
try to
what I-
squeeze them in on
no,
a third
yeah.
or whatever. Okay.
yeah, I'd
That-
reserve the
that way
third
second
for
meeting of the month
this,
is-
and
Yeah.
then, if we have to squeeze somebody into the first, we can kind of push over.
I've only heard of one potential application that will be coming in, and I don't believe it will be anytime soon. They're still in the design phase, so we're just doing some internal meetings right now to discuss exactly what qualifications they would need to meet and standards based upon each individual department. So to be honest with you, there's only one, and it's really in a discussion mode. So once I do get a better understanding of when they look to file, even if it's before the 10th, I will definitely let the board know.
Yeah, I don't expect anything major to come, to suddenly pile up.
You never know, though.
I know, that's the thing. It's like, that,
May get another
Actually, there
yard
might be
shop
two.
request or something
There's
like
actually
that,
might be
but-
two that I just forgot about. So there might be 2 applications coming in, but I will definitely let the
I
board
was
know.
gonna say over 4 to 5 months, what's gonna happen, but.
well, that's the thing. And it's funny because prior to you guys joining, every year we'd say, we're gonna try to take August off. Like, that was sort of and it just never seemed to happen. I think there was once in all the years I've been here, we took an August off.
Well, I think right after I joined, I had one meeting and then we had like nothing for like a month.
Yeah.
That
Well,
might have been 2
and-
We've
months.
had,
Exactly. So then sometimes you just have to take it when you can get it, but we
planning a
always
month off never
tried
works.
for August, but because
But if
everyone
you
was on vacation.
say,
Yeah.
but you always get half a dozen months off throughout the year.
Yeah, so, not this year.
Not this year.
Luck of the draw.
Okay, anything else?
Make a motion to close the meeting at 9 PM? 2 minutes?
9:02.
9:02? I can't really see what that's pointing at right there.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
thank you.
Press this button and I think it goes red.
Oh, Charlie probably doesn't want to